Okay, this is your N3 practice test on rational numbers, both fraction form and decimal form, as well as ordering rational numbers in both fraction and decimal form, and other outcomes related to that. So we have a few questions. Your first few questions are true and false. And this question number one says, is negative a half greater than negative 2? The answer is true. And it's basically just an understanding of negative numbers. If this is 0, negative 1, and negative 2, negative a half is here, negative 2 is here. And we know that when we're dealing with negative numbers, the closer in proximity it is to 0, the larger it is. So the farther away it is from 0, the smaller it is. Or if you think temperature, the farther away a temperature is from 0 degrees Celsius, the colder it is. Or $0 in your bank account, the farther away you are in the hole, the poorer you are. Question 2 says 0.6 repeating is greater than 0.6 terminating decimal is greater than negative 0.6 repeating decimal. And this is the exact same type of question that we just had. If we think about 0 and negative 1, 2/3 of the way would be negative 0.6 repeating. And just before that would be negative 0.6 terminating decimal. So therefore, I should move this over just a bit here. Oh, I can't. Oh, well. 0.6 is closer, which means it's greater, which means this is a true statement. Question number 3, 0.22 is equivalent to 11 over 50, or another way to say it to help you really understand it is 22 hundredths, right, using your place value. So 22 hundredths is 22 over 100. And is that equal to 11 fiftieths? Well, if we think of this in lowest terms, we can divide both by 2, and we would create an equivalent fraction of 11 fiftieths. So yes, it is, and therefore we can circle true. Question number 4 says the sum of those two numbers is greater than the product of those two numbers. So if we think about looking at it, this is going to be negative something. And I don't really care right now what it is. I want to see if there's anything I can do without doing the operation. Because I know I have more negatives than positives, so it's negative something. And because I'm multiplying a negative by a negative, it's going to be positive something. Regardless of what the product or the sum is. I know using just sign rules, that's a positive something. And using what do I have more of when I combine or the sum of something, I have more negatives. So therefore, it cannot be true because a negative something can never be greater than a positive something. Okay? So for those of you who actually solved it and actually worked it out to a number, please make a note of the way I showed you you could solve it, which makes a lot more sense and saves you a lot of effort on your part. Okay? Question number 5 is there 6 true and false or 5? 6 of them? Question 5, rational numbers can be created when you add a plus b where b does not equal 0. This is false. Rational numbers, the formula is a over b, or the ratio of one number to another where b does not equal 0. So it's not the addition or the sum of two numbers, it's the division of two numbers where b does not equal 0. And finally, your last true and false. The product of these two will be equal to each other. Well, if I look at this one, 6.1, that fraction and that decimal are the same number. This decimal and this fraction are the same. The only difference, besides the fact that they are in different forms, is this is a negative times a negative, this is a positive times a positive. But we know that the product is going to yield positive. So since they are the same numbers and they are multiplied and they're all going to be both positive, we can say this is true, right? This is true without working it out. They are the same numbers, just in different forms. And through the associative property of mathematics, the order in which you multiply two terms does not affect the product. So therefore, we can say it's true. All right, the next questions. It says for questions 7 through 10, use greater than, less than, or equal to in the blank. So is 1/2 greater than, less than, or equal to 0.5? They are equal. So we'll put an equal sign in there. Question 2, negative 2 and 2/5, which in decimal form is negative 2.4 and negative 2.25. Which one is greater? Well, again, we're dealing with negative numbers, so the closer it is to 0, the greater it is. So therefore, negative 2.25 is greater than negative 2.4. And here we can do one of two things. I know that Lily would like you to know that creating equivalent fractions with common denominators is not the easiest way to do it. So changing them both to decimals would be a much easier task. And since we're dealing with positive numbers, which one is greater, $1.75 or $1.70? $1.75 is greater, and therefore 1.75 is a greater value. I guess we had one more of these, didn't we? And the last one, negative 5.25 is greater than, less than, or equal to negative 5.3 repeating. Sometimes for those people who don't like to see repeating decimals, if you put an equal number of decimal places to the number you're comparing it to, it's easier to see. Which one's closer to 0? This one is, and therefore it's the greater value. Your next question, 11 and 12, which are numbered incorrectly on my computer, but you get the idea. It says rewrite these rational numbers in ascending order from smallest to largest. So I'm just going to take my number line, make it a little bit bigger, bring it down here, take this, make it a little bit bigger, bring it over here, and ask the question, how do you compare rational numbers in different forms? You choose what form you'd like to show them in. In this case, we're going to choose decimals. So I'm going to convert all of these to decimals. For 4/5, you can take 4 divided by 5 to change it to a decimal. So 4/5 is 0.8. Or you can make it into an equivalent fraction with a base 10 denominator, 8/10. And since 8/10 is 0.8, you can do it that way. Compared to 0.77, put a 0 there, and we'll use 2 decimal places. See how this works. That's the next one. 13/20. If you use this method, 13/20 is equal to how many hundredths? That's 65 hundredths, which is 0.65. Otherwise, you can take your calculator and say 13 divided by 20 equals 0.65. 2/3 is 0.66 repeating. And finally, 0.78 is a terminating decimal, which we can just leave as is. So now that we have it written that way, we're dealing with positive numbers, right? So I'm going to label this one 0. And I'm going to label this one, since my range is, everything has been between 0 and 1, I'll make this one 1 here. I'll make this one 0.5. Those are just placing values on my number line. And therefore, 0.65 would be the smallest. So I'm going to put it right around here. And I'm going to call that one 13/20. That one's done. My next, or closest to 0, would be 2/3, which is going to be roughly here. And I'm going to put that as 2/3. That one's done. 0.77 is next, so I'm going to put that one here maybe. 0.77. Oh, sorry, 7 repeating. Like that. That one's done. 0.78 right next to it. I'm running out of room on that side, so I'll just do it there. And that one's done. And then finally, 4/5, which we'll put here. And that is placing all of those on a number line to show that their value in relation to each other. Same to do with question number 12, I think it is it? I'm going to change them all to decimals. So negative 1 2/3 is number 1.6 repeating. Negative 1.6 terminating decimal. Negative 1 7/5 is negative 1 2/5, which is negative 1 4/10, which is negative 1 4/10. Now, if you couldn't do that, you could just take 7 divided by 5. You know it's going to be negative 7 divided by 5. Still 1 4/10. 1.686868 repeating. I'll just put a ... and negative 1.5. Now we're dealing with negative numbers, so 0 has to go over here. We are dealing with everything between negative 1 and 2. So maybe what I'll do is I'll make this, instead of 0, I'll make this one negative 1 and this one negative 2, because they all fall within that range. That makes this one really easy to place, negative 1.5. So I'll just place that one to start. And then everything else I'll place around that. So before that, negative 1.4 goes here. So I'm going to write it as negative 7/5. That one's your smallest, or your largest number, excuse me. 1.6 will go here, which is negative 1.6. That's done. Negative 1.6 repeating will go here, or negative 1 2/3. That's done. And finally, your last one, negative 1.68. I'll just put it here to save space. Negative 1.68 repeating. And that is your answer, placing all of those on a number line. All right, your next question asks you to estimate and calculate. So this should be able to be done on your test without a calculator because it's addition, subtractive integers, and you should be able to do that. The only thing that should cause you any kind of problem is when you have to calculate multiplication of complex numbers. But if I estimate, I'm going to make this one a positive 1. Take away 4. So when I estimate, I'm going to write down what it is I'm using for estimation. And I'm going to say my estimation is going to be approximately negative 3. Now, if I take this question and I was to solve it using just procedure, I would change it to addition and use the opposite. I'd say, what do I have more of, positives or negatives? I have more negatives. How many more is the difference between the number of negatives I have, the difference meaning subtraction, and the number of positives? Therefore, I have 3.2 more negatives, and my answer will be negative 3.2 exactly, or 3.20. In the second example, question 10. Oh, did I make a mistake? All right, let's go back here and look at what mistake I'm. Oh, I had an 8 and an 8. Look, sorry, this is supposed to be a 7, 9. Borrow, 9, 1. Yes, you're right. 3.19. I wrote it down wrong. Okay, all right, we're good. Question number, whatever it is, says negative 4.02 plus 1.88. So an estimation will be negative 4 plus 2, which is an estimation of negative 2. Calculation, what do I have more of, negatives or positive? I have more negatives. How many more is the difference between them? Got to borrow from 40, I'll make it 39. 12 becomes 4, 1, and 2. I have that many more negatives, so therefore my calculation is negative 2.14. Question 11 is a BEDMAS question asking you to estimate and calculate. For these types of questions, you can use a calculator. So for this one, I'm going to estimate first 3 plus negative 3 times 1, or 3 plus negative 3, or 0. So my estimation, I'm going to ballpark it at being approximately 0. Okay? So now when I actually do my calculations, I'll bring it over here. I'm going to just write it down. I'm going to use my calculator. What is the product of 3.4? Now, if you're not good at sign rules, put your negative symbol in, for heaven's sake. Multiplied by 1.25. The product of those is negative 4.25. Now, the sum between that, and if you add it to a 2.5, the combination of those two will leave you with negative 1.75. And finally, your last of your BEDMAS, I think, is it? Estimate and calculate, is that right? It says, what is this? So I'm going to estimate it as being negative 11, take away 3, divided by negative 2. Keep flip change to help me get my brain around what this is saying. Is negative 14 divided by negative 2. So my estimation will be approximately a positive 7. Right? My estimation will be positive 7, or 7ist. It's supposed to be estimation, but it looks like 7ist. Now that I do my calculation, I'm going to grab my calculator, because I'm not very good at the old mental math game. Well, I am, but generally speaking. 10.5, if you stink at integers, make sure you put your negative. Take away 3.25 equals negative 13.75 divided by negative 2 is the step you have to show. Take that, divide it by negative 2, and you get positive 6.875. Our estimation was 7ish. Our calculation was 6.875. So we were pretty good with our estimation. Question 13, we get into operations of positive and negative fractions. So from grade 7 to grade 9, there's no difference. Just make sure if you have your negative symbol in front of the fraction, drop it in with your numerator. Find your common denominator of 40 is your lowest common denominator. Make your equivalent fractions. which is negative 15/40. And a lot of people don't show this step. Once you have your equivalent fractions, you're going to combine your numerators, which you're going to show, and keep your denominator. If you don't show this step, there is a possibility you won't receive marks for it on a test, which makes your final answer negative 7/40. So all of the work I showed, except for this little arrow doodad up here, should be work you show on your test, right? There shouldn't be much difference. Question number 18, it's not 14, but 18, is the subtraction of these two fractions. So same thing, your lowest common denominator is actually 24. Your equivalent fractions are 16/24 take away 21/24. Don't forget to show this step on your test. 16 take away 21 is negative 5. And negative 5/24 is lowest terms because 5 is a prime number. It can only be divided by 5. And 24 is not divisible by 5. Question 19. This time we're adding fractions, but in mixed form. So negative 7/5 plus 5/2. So our common denominator is 10. Our equivalent fractions are negative 14 and 25. Add the numerators and keep the denominator. What do you have more of, positive or negative? I have more positive. How many more? 11. So 11/10, which is in mixed fraction form, 1 and 1/10. Question number 16 is the product of 3 and negative 1. Now remember, because of the associative property of mathematics, I could technically do this if I wanted to. This is the same question, but that's not what it asks. So 3/1 multiplied by negative 5/4. Remember, if you're changing this to an improper fraction, just ignore this negative symbol until the end. Just ignore that until the end. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, 5/4. Then remember that it's negative and put the negative symbol up there with it, negative 5/4. Common denominator, or look for cross reduction if you can. There isn't any. When multiplying, you don't need a common denominator, so multiply your numerators. Multiply your denominators, negative 15/4, which is improper, which is 3 and 3/4, but don't forget to put the negative symbol, negative 3 and 3/4. Question, what are we on now? 21. Question 21 is the product of 5/6 by negative 2, so 5/6 multiplied by negative 2/1. Smart people will cross reduce. Both are divisible by 2. Negative 1/3. Multiply your numerators to get negative 5. Multiply your denominators to get 3. So negative 1 and 2/3 is your product. If you didn't cross reduce, you ended up with negative 10/6, which is negative 1 and 4/6, which is negative 1 and 2/3 still. Different pathway, but you ended up with the same answer of negative 1 and 2/3. Question, whatever this is. 22. Division of fractions. Keep your first fraction, change to multiplication. Use the reciprocal of the second. Notice how my negative symbol stays in my numerator. Cross reduce if possible, both dividing by 2. Negative 2/1. Negative 1 times negative 2/1 times 3 will be 2/3. Positive 2/3. Now, if you didn't cross reduce, you get positive 4/6, which still reduces down to positive 2/3. Question number 23, division. First step you need to do is change your mixed fractions into improper. 19/8 divided by negative 2/5. Make sure you put your negative sign with your numerator. Once you have that, keep your first fraction. Change to multiplication by the reciprocal. Keep your negative symbol in with your numerator. Now that you're multiplying, check to see if you can cross reduce. You can't, which means the answer I'm going to get here will be in lowest terms. Because I can't cross reduce, My answer will be lowest terms. That's going to be 50 and 40, which is 90. No, that's not lowest terms, is it? Am I making a mistake here? Okay, so 19 times 5 is 50 and 45, which is 95 over 16, which I believe is for 32, 64, 5, 5, is that right? 5 and 15 sixteenths? 5 and 15 sixteenths. So of course I forgot my negative symbol. So negative 5, it could be negative 95, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Question number 24 on your quiz. I think it's the last question, isn't it? Okay. Is your only BEDMAS practice question? You have the sum of two fractions and the product of another. So you're going to do your multiplication first. It doesn't kill you to change your mixed fractions over. So 3/8 multiplied by negative 5 over 2 will be negative 15 over 16. Now that you have it over this, now this is a hard one because the LCD, or the lowest common denominator, is actually 80. If you use 160, absolutely no problem. It just means you have to reduce your fraction. But multiply these by 8 and you get 88 over 80. Now this is tricky. It's multiplied by 5 to get negative 75 over 80. Add your numerators, keep your denominator, and your final answer will be 8 over 80, which in lowest terms is 1/10. No, I made a mistake. 13 over 80. Sorry. 13. No, positive 13 over 80 is your final answer.